Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 23rd July 2018. Now let us begin. Now we have taken this article from the editorial page on page 8. Now what this article talks about is that the United States has unofficially said that it is willing to talk directly with the Taliban in Afghanistan. However, the Taliban has claimed that it has not yet received any invitation for talks. Now, this current US policy of directly talking with the Taliban is a major shift from its earlier policy, wherein the earlier US policy was that the government in Afghanistan and the Taliban should talk and the US would facilitate those talks. However, the Taliban used to refuse direct talks with the Afghan government. And the Taliban had initially asserted that it wanted to talk directly only to the United States. So now hopefully up till here you've understood that the US has unofficially said that it is willing to talk directly with the Taliban in Afghanistan. And this US policy is a major policy shift from the earlier US stand, wherein earlier the United States has asserted that the Afghan government and the Taliban should talk to each other and US would facilitate those talks. But this earlier US stand was rejected by the Taliban, where it wanted direct talks with the United States, wherein it considered the Afghan government as being illegitimate government of Afghanistan. Now the author has also said as to what he considers is the main reason for the shift in US policy. Now the president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, recently announced various confidence building measures with the Taliban, wherein the first confidence building measure was an announcement of a ceasefire. The second confidence building measure was that the Afghan government would recognize Taliban as a political group and not as a terrorist organization. And the third main confidence building measure announced by Ashraf Ghani was the release of some of the Taliban prisoners. However, these confidence building measures announced by the president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, was rejected by the Taliban. And the Taliban continued with its militancy during the announced ceasefire. And apart from this, as highlighted in the article, the Taliban is also gaining ground in Afghanistan, wherein the Taliban is able to fund its militancy through the use of narco-terrorism. Wherein the article has highlighted various figures from the United Nations, wherein the opium production in Afghanistan has increased by 87% in 2017. And the Taliban is using this opium production and further the production and the transportation of heroin to fund their terrorist activities. So now hopefully up till here you've also understood the recent context as given by the author for being the reason for the recent shift in the United States policy, wherein the government of Afghanistan under Ashraf Ghani had extended various confidence building measures with the Taliban, wherein they had announced a ceasefire and were willing to recognize Taliban as a political group and not as a terrorist organization. However, these confidence building measures by the Afghan government was rejected by the Taliban and they continued with their militancy program. And according to the author, the Afghan government and Taliban talks continue to fail in Afghanistan. And therefore, according to the author, the United States government has unofficially accepted the proposal of Taliban for direct talks. Now let us understand as to what might be the impact on India due to the US proposal. When the first impact highlighted by the author is that the US proposal would provide legitimacy by recognizing Taliban as a political group. And this recognition of Taliban as a political group moves against the Indian policy of recognizing Taliban as a terrorist organization. The second impact highlighted by the author is that this US proposal improves Pakistan's strategic depth in Afghanistan. And this US proposal would improve Pakistan's strategic depth in Afghanistan because of Pakistan's influence on the Taliban. And the third main impact as highlighted by the author is that the US proposal undermines the Afghanistan's government institutions, which the government of India has been supporting in building, wherein various government institutions in Afghanistan, such as its army, police force, the parliament, among other, have been supported by India, such as the training of police and military officials of Afghanistan in India, the support to Afghanistan's parliamentarian groups, among other forms of India's support to the Afghan government institutions. So now hopefully up till here you understood the impact on India that has been highlighted by the author due to the US proposal, wherein the first impact highlighted by the author is that the US proposal would provide legitimacy to the Taliban as a political group. And this US policy would then undermine India's stand, wherein India considers Taliban as a terrorist organization. The second impact of this US proposal is that it would improve Pakistan's strategic depth in Afghanistan due to its influence with the Taliban. And the third main impact, as highlighted by the author, is that the US proposal undermines Afghan's government institutions, wherein India has been supporting the building of Afghan's government institutions, such as training the military and the police force, providing support to Afghanistan's parliamentarian groups. And this US policy would undermine Afghan's government institution, which would then undermine India's influence within Afghanistan. So now hopefully you've understood the crux of this article. But you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, wherein you have to wait and see on how this US proposal moves forward. While apart from this, with regards to your UPSC syllabus, wherein this article and the explanation given in this section would be placed in GS paper 2, within the international relations section and within the subsection India and its neighborhood relations. Now previously questions have been asked in your UPSC mains examination, wherein previously questions on political developments in Afghanistan, on Taliban, and upon India's role in Afghanistan has been continuously asked in your UPSC mains examination. And within that context, this article and the explanation given in this section becomes relevant. However, considering the fact that this news is currently in transition, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 12. Now what we'll try to understand from this article is about white helmets. And we'll try to understand about what is white helmets from the perspective of your prelims examination. Now white helmets is a volunteer-based search and rescue organization in Syria. And the official name of white helmets is Syria's Civil Defense. And the reason the white helmets are in the news is because the volunteers of the white helmets and their families have been evacuated from southwest Syria. And these people have been evacuated by Israel through the Golan Heights. Now Golan Heights is a territory that is currently occupied by Israel but is considered a part of Syria. And these white helmets and their families, which have been evacuated by Syria through the Golan Heights, have been settled in Jordan with the help of Israel. So now hopefully you understand as to what are the white helmets and why they are currently in the news. Now the reason it is required to know as to what are the white helmets for your prelims examination, because previously questions have been asked, wherein previously questions on international non-government organizations such as Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International have been asked in the prelims examination, wherein the previously asked questions have focused as to what is the purpose of that international non-governmental organization. And within that context, you understand that White Helmets is a volunteer-based search and rescue organization based in Syria. Now a related question for your practice is a question which has been asked in the prelims of 2015. However, you would be able to answer this question on Golan Heights from the explanation given in this section. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken the first article from page 1 and the second article from the editorial page on page 8. Now what both of these articles talk about is that the Government of India intends to amend the Right to Information Act of 2005, wherein according to the editorial, the central government intends to change the tenure, salary and the allowances of the Chief Information Commissioner and of the Information Commissioner at both the central level and at the state level. Now according to the editorial, one of the main reasons for the central government to amend the Right to Information Act of 2005 is that the information commissions are not constitutional bodies like the Election Commission, but are only statutory bodies that have been created under the law. And because of this, the tenure, salary and allowances of the Chief Information Commissioner or the Information Commissioner at the center or the state level should not be at par to the Election Commission. Wherein currently what happens is that according to the law, the salaries and allowances of the Chief Information Commissioner shall be same as that of the Chief Election Commissioner, while the salary and allowances of the Information Commissioner shall be same that of an Election Commissioner. and therefore there is parity between the Information Commissioner and the Election Commissioner. But according to the government, the Information Commission is not a constitutional body like the Election Commission, and therefore the Government of India seeks to change the tenure, salary, and allowances of the Chief Information Commissioner and the Information Commissioners at the centre and state level. Now, the editorial has highlighted various negative impacts that this proposal of the Government of India may have, wherein such a change in the tenure, salary, or the allowances of the Chief Information Commissioner would eliminate the parity that they currently have with the Chief Election Commissioner. And according to the editorial, this change by the Government of India will increase its hold on the Central Information Commission and its various officers, wherein the central government can influence the various officers of the Central Information Commission by influencing their tenure, salary, or allowances. Now you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, wherein the Government of India is yet to bring that amendment bill that seeks to bring changes to the Right to Information Act of 2005, and we'll have to wait and see on how the Government of India seeks to amend the Right to Information Act of 2005. Now, one important aspect that you should remember for your prelims examination is that the Chief Information Commissioner has its pay, allowance, and conditions of services as same as that of the Chief Election Commissioner, and the Chief Election Commissioner has its matters of pay, allowances, and conditions of services equivalent to the Judge of the Supreme Court. And apart from this, the Information Commission is a statutory body, while the Election Commission and the Supreme Court are constitutional bodies. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 14. Now what we'll try to understand from this article is to understand a static economics concept of GDP deflator. Now the GDP deflator is also called implicit price deflator. And a GDP deflator is a measure of inflation, wherein GDP inflator is measured by nominal GDP divided by real GDP with the subsequent answer multiplied by 100. Now before further understanding as to what is GDP inflator, you have to first understand as to what is GDP. Wherein GDP is the total monetary value of all the finished goods and services produced within the boundaries of a country in a specified time period, which is usually of 1 year. Now let's say that there is one country called A, and this country only produces one good, which is sugar. So let us assume that the GDP of this country A in year 1 is of roughly $1,000, wherein this monetary value of $1,000 is what the country A has produced from sugar. And let us assume that the price of sugar in year 1 has been of $2. Now assuming that the GDP of country A in year 2 has now increased to $1,200, and this monetary value of $1,200 is just from finished one product, that is of sugar. But the price of sugar in year 2 has now risen to $3. Now you have to understand that GDP basically measures the productivity of a country. And from this figure, it seems that the productivity of country A has increased by 20%. But the question is whether this 20% gives the actual representation of the productivity of this country, and as to whether that this country A actually produced 20% more goods within 1 year. Now within this case, an increase in GDP can be due to two reasons. First, an increase in price, and second, due to an increase in the quantity of production. Now as you can see, there has been an increase of $1 in the prices. And in terms of quantity for second year, country A produced 400 kg of sugar. And when we multiply the quantity that has been produced in the second year, which here is 400 kg, with the prices of the first year or the base year, we get the real GDP, which is of $800. But the nominal GDP of country 2 in year 2 had been of $1,200. So now hopefully with this you've gotten a simplified understanding as to what is real GDP and what is nominal GDP. Wherein nominal GDP is the monetary value of goods and services an economy produces in a particular year at current prices, wherein this monetary value has also been unadjusted for inflation. Wherein if you take a look at the example, the $1,200, which is the nominal GDP, has been calculated at current prices of $3 per kg. While real GDP is the monetary value of goods and services an economy produces in a particular year at constant prices, meaning the prevailing prices at a base year, wherein this monetary value has also been adjusted for inflation. Wherein, if you take a look at the example again, the real GDP of $800, wherein Q2 is the goods and services an economy has produced in a particular year, but it has been calculated at a constant price or the price of $2 per kg of a particular base year, wherein this $800 then gives a monetary value which has been adjusted for inflation, wherein the calculation of nominal GDP and real GDP gives a measure of inflation in the form of the GDP inflator. Now you have to understand that the monetary value of the goods and services that a country produces in one year is difficult and complicated to calculate. And you have to understand that this was a simple example wherein you had only one product, which was sugar. Now let us understand the various advantages of measuring inflation through the GDP deflator. Now the first advantage of the GDP inflator is that it helps in finding the real reason for the increase in GDP. Wherein the GDP deflator shows on how the extent to which the increases in the GDP has happened due to higher prices. The second main advantage of GDP deflator is that it is a comprehensive measure of inflation. Since the calculation of a GDP deflator covers the entire range of goods and services produced in the economy, it is a more comprehensive measure of inflation. While the measure of inflation through WPI or the Wholesale Price Index or the CPI or the Consumer Price Index only takes into account a particular basket of goods and services. So now hopefully up till here you've also understood the importance of the GDP deflator in the measurement of inflation, wherein the GDP deflator helps in finding reasons for the increase in GDP, as in it shows the extent to which the increase in GDP has happened due to higher prices or an increase in output. And secondly, the GDP deflator is a more comprehensive measure of inflation, wherein it covers all goods and services that are produced in an economy, wherein the consumer price indices and the wholesale price indices have a specific basket of goods and services upon which they calculate inflation. Now, the GDP deflator in India is provided in the National Accounts Statistics, which is provided by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So now hopefully you have understood as to what is GDP deflator. Is a measure of inflation and is given by the nominal GDP divided by the real GDP multiplied by 100. And the measure of inflation under GDP deflator is provided in the National Accounts Statistics by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation in India. Now with regards to UPSC syllabus, wherein GDP deflator would be placed in GS paper 3 within the section Economic Development and within the subsection Government Budgeting, wherein previously questions have been asked in your prelims and mains examination on static topics of economics, and it is within that context that the understanding of GDP deflator becomes relevant. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 14. Now what this article talks about is the CAATSA Law. And what we'll do is try to revise the Countering America's Adversaries through Sanctions Act or the CAATSA Law of the United States and understand on how it impacts India-Russia relations and what has been the response to the CAATSA Law by the Indian government. Now the reason this article is relevant with regards to your UPSC Civil Services examination is because will fall under GS paper 2 in the section International Relations and more specifically effect of policies of developed countries on India's interest, wherein previously questions have been asked, wherein the first question was asked in the year 2010 with regards to the recent hike in visa processing fees on US visas. And the second question was asked in the year 2012 with regards to the negative impact of protectionist measures proposed by the US on India's software industry. And in similar terms, the law which this article talks about has significant implications on India. Now, the US, under Countering America's Adversaries through Sanctions Act, mandates US President to impose sanctions on entities which have transactions with Russian defense and intelligence sectors. However, India has close defense partnership with Russia, and because of which India can come under sanctions under the new American Act. However, under this act, the US President can issue waivers. Now, hopefully, up till here, you've understood that the Countering America's Adversaries through Sanctions Act mandates the US President to impose sanctions on entities which have transactions with Russian defense and intelligence sector, wherein India has close defense partnership with Russia and therefore can come under sanctions under this new American Act. And so there has been talks within America itself wherein the US President can issue waivers to countries such as India, wherein this act might end up having negative impact on Indo-US relations. Now you have to understand that this news is in transition and we have to wait on how the US moves forward with this act and with regards to the waivers that can be given to India. And so now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 7. Now the reason this article is in the news is because the Watershed Development component of the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana has only had 10% of its projects completed. So now what we'll do with regards to this article is first understand as to what is watershed. After that, we'll try to understand as to what is watershed development. And then finally, we'll try to understand as to why there has been slow progress under the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. Now let us start with first understanding as to what is watershed. Now we'll try to understand what is watershed with the help of the chapter drainage system from the class 11th NCERT book. India Physical Environment. Now you have to understand that a catchment area is the specific area from which a river collects water from, and two or more catchment areas form what is called a watershed. Now an area which has been drained by a river and its tributaries is called its drainage basin, and therefore a group of watershed or two or more watersheds form what is called a river basin. So if you look at this image, the specified areas are known as watersheds. And these groups of watershed form what is called the drainage basin of a river. So therefore the boundary line which separates one drainage basin from another is known as a watershed, wherein watersheds are small in area while river basins cover larger areas. Now one important aspect of watersheds or basin is that they directly affect the other parts and the unit as a whole. And this is why river basins or watersheds are accepted as the most appropriate micro or macro planning region with regards to water conservation, water management, among other factors. So now hopefully you have gotten a basic understanding as to what is a watershed. Now let us understand as to what is watershed development. Now watershed development refers to the conservation, regeneration and the judicial use of water resources that are available in a particular area of watershed, wherein watershed development in simple terms means about making running water to stop and standing water to sink inside the surface. And this form of watershed development is crucial for rain-fed areas so that water can be conserved by making the running water to stop and the groundwater can be recharged by making standing water to sink inside. And apart from this, this also prevents soil degradation in those areas. So at the site of a watershed development project, a ridge is identified and structures such as dams, ponds and channels are built from the ridge to the valley. So now hopefully you have understood as to what is watershed development. So now let us understand as to why there has been slow progress under the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. Now what the Parliamentary Committee report has found under this scheme is that not a single project that has been sanctioned between 2009 and 2015 has been completed. And the committee in its report has termed the pace of development as being lethargic. Now the first reason given in the article for the slow progress of this scheme is that there is long gestation periods wherein projects take up 4 to 7 years to complete, and therefore long-term results of this project are not currently visible. The second reason is that many concrete permanent structures that are required under this scheme have not been constructed by states, and because of the long gestation period for a project to be completed, states are reluctant to provide resources. The third reason for the slow progress is that there was a change in funding patterns in 2016, where initially 90% of the funding came from the center and 10% from the states. But in 2016, it was changed that 60% would now come from the center, while 40% had to be borne by the states. And this change in the funding pattern also contributed to a slowdown, wherein the states were initially unwilling to provide resources for these projects. The increase in state funding further contributed to a slowdown. The fourth reason is that there have been delays due to lack of coordination, wherein under this program there needs to be a convergence between the Department of Land, NREGA, Ministry of Water Resources and Agriculture, state departments, and because so many departments are required for the success of this program, it makes coordination difficult and longer, and thereby delaying the various projects. And the fifth and the last reason is that when the groundwater table increases due to the successful implementation of the scheme, the farmers in the area go for water intensive crops such as paddy and sugarcane, and thereby the farmers again drain the water resources that have been saved due to watershed management projects. And this again raises the issue of sustainability. So now hopefully you have understood as to why there has been a slow progress under the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. Now let us understand as to where this article and the explanation given in this section would be placed in your UPSC syllabus. Within this article and the explanation given in this section would be placed in GS paper 3 within the section Economic Development and within the subsection Irrigation System Storage. Wherein previously a question has been asked as to what is water use efficiency. Describe the role of micro irrigation in increasing water use efficiency, and this question was asked in 2016 in GS paper 3. And in similar terms, this article and the explanation given in this section would also be placed in GS paper 1 under the section Geography of the World, wherein previously questions have been asked in GS paper 1, wherein the second question asked in what ways micro watershed development projects help in water conservation in drought prone and semi-arid regions of India. And in similar terms, a question for your practice: what is watershed development? Analyze the causes for the ineffective implementation of watershed development projects under Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.